Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Championship Leadership Podcast, and we have a very special episode here. I guess you'd say a milestone, right? The 300th Championship Leadership Podcast, and it's been almost 4 years in the making. So I no one better than a great friend and mentor of mine, Jimmy Dowds from Scotland. He said I wasn't going to be able to pronounce it, but we're going to see if we can get this right. Dunfermline, Scotland. What you said, it's the Kingdom of Fife.
That's the name of the region, yeah.
Of the region. All right. Yeah. So, well, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
It's a massive honor, and thank you for inviting us, Nate.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a little bit of background, I guess. For those listening, Jimmy was introduced to me, I don't know, has it been 2 years? I don't know if has it been 2 years? I think it was like kind of right during the pandemic. A good friend of ours, Danny Duran, made the introduction, and we've been staying in touch ever since, and it's been fun. Now I'm looking forward to getting out to Scotland at some point here, but we were chatting last week. If you're listening to this, what is it? It's end of April of 2022. But we were chatting last week, and I said, hey, I got my 300th episode and I should probably make a big deal out of this. And he said, yeah, absolutely you should. And then I asked him, I was like, well, what significance is there of 300 in the Bible? And you mentioned Gideon's army of 300 soldiers. And I thought that would be a perfect kind of topic of conversation. We can talk about all kinds of other things as well. But before we do get into too much of that, there is one question I like to ask all my podcast guests. So I'm going to shoot this over to you and see what your response is. And then we can kind of get into your background a little bit so that people can get familiar with you. But what Championship Leadership is the name of the podcast. It's always interesting to hear, because I've had some folks from across the pond, as they say on the podcast before, and they always have a little different definition than some of us stateside here. So Championship Leadership is the name of the podcast. What comes to mind when you hear Championship Leadership?
Okay, so what comes to mind is listening to the previous answers that have been given on here. It's been tremendous, and it's a bit like, can you add to that? But I'm just going to shoot straight for it, because the list I have here of 3 or 4, I'm not sure I've heard on here before, but for me, they're the top 4 personally. Mm-hmm. And I respect and honor everybody else's answers. So the number 1 might come as a surprise, is fun.
Yeah.
And because there's a great verse that says, the joy of the Lord is our strength. And what I've seen with leaders is that if they know you enjoy them and enjoy their company and spend time enjoying them before every single leadership session begins, you end up with the highest motivated team ever. Because we know that, there's 100 ways to strengthen a championship leadership team, from nutrients to exercise to all kinds of things, but fun is like a nuclear bomb of strength in a team of leadership. And the second one I would say very quickly is encouragement. Not encouragement. So encouragement is just, giving a moral boost and motivating people, but encouragement is quite different. Encouragement is when you identify each of your leaders' greatest fear and you blitz it with an encouragement bomb. So you target the courage, you put a huge dose right into the center of the greatest fear. When you do that, transformation begins. The third one that's worked for me in the last 40 years in a number of countries is target the kid. Target the kid. It must
be
the kid, yeah, the KID inside.
Oh, okay, yes,
your leaders. Because I stopped speaking to adults 10, 15 years ago. When I'm speaking to leadership teams, whether it's a team of 10 or 12, or whether it's 25,000 leaders in the Colosseum in Bogota, Colombia, I no longer speak to adults. I speak to the 7-year-old child inside the adult, because most scientific research would indicate that our blueprint for life is pretty much fixed by the time we get to 7 years of age. So if you speak to the 7-year-old kid in a leader, boom, the adult takes care of itself, and the transformation is deep, radical, and lasting.
Yeah.
And the last one, very quickly, and finally, is a kind bomb, KIND bomb. And so what I mean by that is that, if I was teaching a team of CEOs tomorrow, I would be saying top of their list in everything they do ought to be kindness. Nothing transforms a leadership team than kindness, but a kind bomb is what I would describe a kind bomb like this. So your team might forget almost every other thing you teach them at times. As hard as they try and practice, they may forget every other thing, but they will never forget the moment that you bombed them with an act of kindness in the moment of their greatest need. Yeah. They may have been 9 years of age or 55 years, but when they needed it most, the dark night of the soul, whatever it is, and you hit them, not just with a random act of kindness, which is great, but with a kind bomb. You went over the top. You went the second mile, the third, the fourth, fifth. Those are 4 of the keys at the top of my list in raising and transforming a great leaders.
I love it. That's awesome. And those are, 300 episodes in. It's been very interesting. I say this all the time, but how many different versions of championship leadership I've gotten. I don't know that I've really gotten any one that's been any 2 that have been the same, but that was very, very unique. And I don't know that I've ever had anyone really highlight and talk about those 4 things that you talked about. And so that's powerful. So I would if you're listening, definitely come back and take some notes and hopefully take and implement some of these things that you're hearing from these episodes and these guests into your life. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your journey, so we can get to know Jimmy Dowds a little bit better and how that's gotten you to where you are today, and what is it that you're up to today?
Okay, so I'll be 70 in July. So I reckon I've only got about 30 years left at the top of my game. So
that's right.
I sharpen the pencil and rewrite my vision every 10 years. And so I started off as a kid. My dad's from Ireland, mother from Glasgow, and between them they had 17 children. And, in a 3-bedroom little house, that's a little bit too much. So when
17?
Yeah, I have 10 sisters and 6 brothers.
Holy moly. Are you the oldest?
I'm number 12.
12. Okay.
People say in Scotland, there's something wrong with you if you have more than 10 children. Well, here it goes. And so when I was 16, I decided, I need to get a life. There's not enough space in this house. So I thought, how do you get a life? Well, first you get a wife. And so I looked in the local newspaper for the most beautiful woman I could find. I cut the picture out, I take it to my family and announce my wedding. And it was 6 months. I didn't even know who she was, where she was, but it took me 6 months to find her. And then last year we celebrated 50 years of beautiful marriage together.
Wow.
And we're both been working in leadership for all those 50 years ever since. And that's what we're still doing, mostly because of the pandemic, on Zooms in a number of nations. But anyway, so leadership transformation, and we were transforming 3,000 leaders every year at a conference in London and Wembley Arena, and then in different countries. And for us, we couldn't care less whether there's a group or 6 leaders, or, you know, one time my wife addressed 55,000 ladies in the World Cup Stadium in Peru, even though she was the most shy lady I'd ever met. It took me 10 years just to get her to read some announcements in public. But we've been transformed over the years in tremendous ways, but we're as excited about being in front of one person as we are of the 25,000 that would gather in the Colosseums of Bogota. So that's what we've been up to, Nate.
What led you down the number one? You literally found your wife, I guess, first off.
Yeah.
You found a picture.
We don't hang about in Scotland.
And then hunted her down.
Yeah, we don't hang about, man.
I like it. I love it. That's incredible. I got to hear more of that story someday. Yeah. But what brought you to being a pastor? Like what brought God into your life and
well,
that journey?
You know, we were caught up in the whole hippie thing.
Yeah.
And we were lying in the mud with 30,000 other hippies, most of us stoned, some of them naked, listening to a band called Bartley James Harvest in Reading, England.
Okay.
And I had been given some bad stuff. And to tell the truth, I was going crazy. And I reckon I had 8 more hours on this bad stuff that had been sold me. They would sell you anything then. They just mix it up with any old thing. And
sure.
So after 5 minutes, I had no idea of following God and no connection with church or anything, but I was desperate. And I cried out to God and I said, you know what, God, if you could get me off the stuff, not that I was addicted or anything, but if you can just get me through the night, then I'll follow all the days of my life. And it was as simple as that. There was other events took place, but anyway, within 30 seconds, I was sound asleep, woke up, fresh as a daisy, took my wife's hand and said, okay, that's the end of that world. Let's step into the new one. Came home. Wow. And as I said, there was other moments, but that was the big turn. God showed up, and he's been showing up in ridiculous, exciting, and miraculous ways ever since.
Yeah, that's amazing. It almost sounds like Woodstock over here, the place that you were at.
Yeah, well, Jimi Hendrix was my hero back in those days.
Was it?
With playing the American national anthem down there at Woodstock.
There
we go.
Well, let's I want to get into, again, coming back to this being a special episode. They're all special for sure for their own reasons, but the 300th episode, and I don't know what made me think of it, but I guess obviously the fact that we were talking and just had the thought pop into my head, I guess you'd say, as I think God tends to do for us, and to ask you, the significance of 300 and being as that tying into the 300th episode here, and you thought almost instantly of Gideon's army and how the story of how that happened. So if you could, maybe let's dive into that and talk about the significance of 300 in the Bible and in that story and how that relates to what we're doing here today.
Well, it's an absolutely brilliant story, because Gideon, when the Lord first came to him and said, you're a mighty warrior, he was like, you're winding me up. You know, he was like, I'm just a wee guy. Use the word "we" over there. Small. Wee.
Well, not really, but
You get it.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, small.
Yeah.
So he's like, I'm just a wee guy in a wee family in a wee place and all this nonsense. And so, as with most leaders, they have one single self-doubt. And I should mention that we could talk another time about stress, because stress is a complete myth. And the root of stress is nothing external, but it's an inner question of doubt. And so most leaders think they need a big, huge army. They need big, huge resources. Yeah. They need a big, huge letters after their name. They need something huge. But God, and so Gideon, with his self-esteem issue, was thinking, well, maybe when my army's 30,000, maybe I can win the battle. And God's like, okay, we would use a word here, a great word in Scotland is feardigouts. So God said to him, which is basically people that are afraid, scared people. So God was all like, right, okay, let's send all the feardigouts home, all the scared, fearful ones. Yeah. And so he sends 20,000 home. And Gideon's like, how am I going to win the battle? I'm down to 10,000. And I love how God seems to be having fun with them. He said, okay, so just to get it through your system, that I am all you need. I am all you need. He could have trimmed them down to 1, but he said, let's get you down to 300. So he got the army down to 300, and now he's totally freaking out. But it's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant message of encouragement to all of us that if God is on your side, it doesn't matter what resources, who's on your side, who's not, the size of your army, the size of your education, the size of your experience. If God's on your side, you could go into the battle full of confidence, full of faith, and win the battle. And I've seen that happening in 40, 50 years. And because I went to the most evil prison in Argentina some years ago, and they had 300 mafia. This is why it's so important. Yeah. 300 mafia controlling the prison, 3,300 murderers, rapists, goodness knows what. Wow. And so, but God shows up. One man, not one man with 300, one man on his own. Yeah. Goes in there and begins a church. And the mafia said, we will kill you because you'll ruin our drug market. But when my wife and I arrived there, 2,200 of the inmates had given their life to God, were on fire for Jesus. And there wasn't one single mafia guard left. In fact, the prison doesn't have any guards anymore when we were there. The prison was now run by 30 pastors, and 2,200 had come and given their life to Jesus. Wow. There was about 500 people that were ready to join the church of 2,200, but first they had to learn how to fast and give up television, because they found that the inmates that didn't give up television and disconnect themselves from the evil stuff going on in the world, when they come out of prison, they didn't make it. Mm-hmm. So the 300 for me personally is wonderfully significant. Yeah. Because it links me to the greatest prison revival in Argentina and the greatest revival in a man's life who had no self-esteem, Gideon. Yeah. Yeah. Why, that's how did that come about? How did you end up at the most dangerous prison in Argentina? What happened there? Well, I've been in a number of these prisons. Yeah. My favorite one is Angola State Prison in Baton Rouge. It's a favorite one because I met the most unbelievable men of faith there. But in that state, as many of you most know, when you get life sentence there, you don't see daylight again. But there's a tremendous man of God in America called Ed Silvoso, and he sparked a lot of the revival in Argentina, and he would do these tours, and a friend invited me to go with him with my wife, and but it's quite a scary moment when they marched 2,200 former rapists, former murderers into a room to have church.
Yeah.
And the only thing between you and them is a little piece of rope, the thickness of your pinky finger. And you're like, well, I hope they're really changed, these guys.
Yeah,
You know, not just 90%, but it was marvelous, brilliant, inspiring moment.
Yeah, I can only imagine. That's amazing. What's you know, the thing that stuck out as I was revisiting Gideon's story in the Bible, in Judges, it was you know, how often he like questioned God a lot of times in that, like, right, he was like, hey, you know, he asked him to give him proof, which, number one, there's a few things I'm like, man, to ask God to prove to you that he's real, right?
Yeah.
Almost seems like blasphemy, I guess, a little bit. And then he didn't just do it once, right? He did it a number of times, you know, the few different times of, hey, if the ground is dry, but my rug or my carpet is wet, then I'll know it's you. And then that happens, and that's not enough. And then he asked, well, you know, if you could do this one more time for me. I'm like, you know, because I think we can all relate to that, especially as leaders, because there's often many times where I think you question the path that you're on, or the things that you ask people to do, or to, you know, to lead, for others to trust in you and to lead you. And so I think there's, you know, some parallels there for sure. But it was just, you know, that's what really stood out to me, is how much he questioned God before he really was able to fully submit to him and what God was telling him to do. I mean, and I can understand it as well. He's like, you want me to go from 20,000 men to 300 to fight an army over 100,000? Like, are you nuts? Yeah. What? Yeah. Like, how is this supposed to happen? And God's just telling him to trust in him, and he's telling him that, you know, he's going to be okay, and that this is going to happen. But yeah, so you know, I mean, I think we could all relate to that, because, you know, it's hard for people to give their life to Christ and to really submit, and and they probably have a lot more reason and aren't being asked necessarily to do something as big as that, right?
Yeah. Well, every leader goes through a season where the heavens are like brass. There's no prayer being answered. There's no sense of the presence of God. And Ruth CarterStapleton, the sister of Jimmy Carter, once wrote a book in his footsteps, and it was brilliant. And she went through 2 years of torment. And she was a counselor. One lady was coming down her path, and she just opened the door, unwashed, hair not combed, and she just said, I can't help you. I'm in a worse state than you. You know, go away. Yeah. And the lady went away and emailed her, sent her a letter after that said, I'm completely healed. I'm completely healed. She said, what? and she said, yeah, because I always thought you were perfect. I always thought you could hear God. But now I realize I'm just the same as you. I'm okay.
Yeah.
But the diamond in the book was that she'd gone through a 2-year period where, because God wasn't answering her questions, he was gone. And he took her to the wilderness, where he led the people with fire and a cloud, and then he removed an awareness of his presence. Now, this is very, very key, because we all think he removes his presence. He said, I will never leave you or forsake you. But he does remove an awareness of his presence, so that our faith can grow. And the problem with most Christian leaders is they're too nice. Now, Jesus was loving, kind, forgiving, but he weren't nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
He once called a bunch of guys a brood of vipers. He once took a whip to some guys in church.
Yeah.
And so, well, we're too nice. But God copes it. God doesn't, he hasn't got a fragile emotional system where he's going to have a nervous breakdown if we ask too many questions or ask the wrong thing. He's a father. And so, but in fact, I had run out of questions 2 months ago to ask God about a situation. So I picked a fight. I don't recommend it to everybody. It's not the most perfect theology, but I run out of questions. And like Jacob, I thought, and I got a phone call from a friend whose husband was in a coma for 50 solid days. And she called and said, hey, Elmer, Jim, and lots of people praying for this guy. So I'm not saying it was me, my prayer. I'm just telling, she said, could you pray? I said, no, I won't pray. I'm going to drive there right now. It was 4:30 in the morning, winter, cold, rain. I drove to the other side of Glasgow and walked around the hospital 7 times. I just walked around and said, God, you promised to raise the dead. You promised to show up when we pray. You promised to answer. I said, come on now. One measly little Scotsman needs to be raised for the dead. If that's too much for you, if I'm asking too much, you need to explain something to me. You need to explain, because for the last 3 Mondays, the doctors have begged his wife, let us switch the machines off. This guy's brain dead, his body's dead, he's dead, dead, dead. Well, I picked a fight, and I repented after, but I picked a fight, and I said, God, all I'm asking is for one measly friend to be raised from the dead. The very next day, boom, the organs in his body kicked in. And that man, I'm only talking a few months ago now.
Yeah, I remember that.
He's now leading worship now. He's preaching around the country now. He's unbelievable. And so, I love it that you highlighted up with Gideon. We don't ask enough questions.
Yeah.
With God. And we don't get down to business. I'm talking about me. I'm not putting that on anybody else. But there we go.
Yeah. So you're saying we should ask
100%.
We should ask more questions.
100%. It's relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Humbly ask.
My initial thought, I think, was like almost, how dare you ask questions, right? Like, or something like that. Like, wow.
I think 2 things we don't do enough, and it's the 2 things he says. He says he will do whatever we ask or imagine. And he said, if you go to your neighbor's house for a loaf of bread, a loaf of bread, and he doesn't answer, it's just keep nipping his head, keep banging on the door. And if you nip his head long enough, he'll come out and give you bread. And so God said, this is how we ask. But we don't ask enough, and we don't imagine enough.
So would you say asking questions, because I've heard this from a number of people, clients. Edmund was one of them. He was one of the gentlemen that you had the chance to talk to, that group of men that you came in and had the conversation with a few weeks ago.
Brilliant guy.
Edmund, he's like, he struggles with prayer. He doesn't know how to pray. And so I guess, it seems weird or awkward to him, probably because of the idea of what he thinks prayer is. So I guess my question, long way of getting around to it, is having those conversations and asking those questions, would that be considered a form of prayer with God?
Yeah, 100%. So that gentleman has no problem with prayer at all. He has a problem with what he thinks prayer should be.
Yeah.
But when Jesus said, I didn't come to call you to be slaves, I call you to be friends. So with respect, with honor, he just needs to talk to God the same way he talked that day to you and me, like friends.
Right.
Talk like friends, ask questions. And because God doesn't want some kind of structure. He just wants relationship. He just wants relationship.
Yeah.
And so when you get that, and when I became a Christian, it was weird, because people would tiptoe around the church, and whisper like God was going to have a nervous breakdown, a wee nervous breakdown if they shouted, or, that strange behavior. And listen, I respect all forms of church, all forms of building, stained glass windows. But when we built our church as it was an ancient lemonade factory. I asked them to keep all the steel, all the industrial parts as much as they could, for the simple reason I didn't want people tiptoeing around like it was like some holy place. Jesus took down the temple, the holy place. And he said, from now on, we are the holy place. He dwells in us. We are the temple. So when the kids come in, hey, pastor, and they're high end, which they should be full of noise, of course, respect and honor. But and that's part of the image that's been passed on to us, that God has got some kind of nervous condition. We've got to approach him in a certain way.
Well, I think along those same lines, there's always been also something as when I attending church, and people talk differently, and this is an honest to God thought I've always had, and probably have never really been willing to say it out loud. But I've always just thought it's weird how when pastors or people from the front of the church, they have like this different, and I get it also, but they have this different tone. They sound weird. They sound fruity. Like, it's like, why did you all of a sudden just get this new accent when you're, because I think that's part of what people think now you're supposed to do, which seems weird to someone like myself or an everyday person. That's like, that's weird. Like, that's how I'm supposed to have conversation with God.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that make sense?
It makes absolutely perfect sense, Nate. And even as a pastor, my biggest problem was going to conferences. I didn't have a clue what they were talking about half the time, because I didn't grow up with that language. And so I made a radical decision when I'd been pastor a number of years. I was scared. Now, we've all got a little bit of a telephone voice and a Zoom voice.
Absolutely.
And if you don't, no one will have a clue. Sometimes in some countries I have to use two interpreters, one to interpret from Scottish into English, and another one from English into Thai language, whatever it is. And so I get that you have to tidy up a wee bit, but we put Saul's armor on sometimes, with our language, and I think that I made a decision because I could see this was happening to me, and I was beginning to lose touch with the man on the street and the language he uses and the way he speaks. And so I made a radical decision to become one of the first pastors or chaplains of a professional soccer team in Scotland. Manchester United was the only professional soccer team in the United Kingdom that paid a pastor. And Scotland only had 4. And I made a decision to go there every single week and be around footballers cursing, swearing, managers shouting, rough and tumble. Every week I would go there and be amongst them, lead many to Jesus, make great friends, help them to be great champions, give them faith principles, no matter what the faith were. And I did that for the simple reason I was losing touch with the man on the street. And I was beginning to lose the ability to know, what do they talk about? How do they speak? What interests them? And so I did that, and I'm still doing that in football circles to this day to a different extent. But for the last 20 odd years, I've worked in the church and on the street, and I did it completely voluntary. And now Scotland has something like 325 pastors in soccer teams.
Wow.
Helping players with their problems, saving them from suicide, giving them kingdom principles. So yeah, I get it, Nate. But when I saw that hand to me, that's and now talking to somebody in church or the man on the street, I'll let you a secret. Many Christian leaders are scared of talking to the man on the street because they no longer, and it's not their fault. Sometimes the pressures of the job demands too much of their time.
Right.
And they're unable to do that. But I have loved spending so much of my life with the guys on the street, Even a thing like when our club was in the top league and they had no money. This is how much they had no money.
Yeah.
They called me, Pastor, we have a problem. This is the fun bit, guys. You got a bit of fun. They said, we don't have any pants for the players. Now in Scotland, pants are underpants, not
okay.
not the outer ones.
Yeah.
And I said, you must be winding me up. And he said, no, because the club provide them and wash them after every game. But I think the players, I don't know, they disappeared. So I had to go and get a bunch of money and give them money to buy pants, underpants for the players for the next game. How much more fun could you have in life?
No doubt.
To watch your team on television playing, and you bought their pants. This is Christianity on the street, brother. This is
I love it.
on the street, brother.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. Like I bought their pants. You see those players out there?
Oh my God, they would be naked if it wasn't for me, brother. I'm just joking.
That's good stuff. What's a moment for you? This is a question that I like to ask, is kind of a fork in the road moment for you, kind of a critical moment where obviously you made the decision that you had that has you where you are today, but had you chosen a different path, you could be somewhere completely different in life. Is there a moment or two that comes to mind for you that you could share? I think there's a lot of people that are faced with those moments, if not often on a daily basis.
There's two moments. One, when I was a little kid, maybe 8, my mother decided she had one child too many. So she put me in an orphanage, and each night the kids would cry and go to the sleep. They would scream and cry, and I was like, what's the problem here? Even as a little kid, I've always been a dreamer, and everything just seems so simple to me. And maybe too simple, maybe just because I'm a simple man. I'm certainly not the most intelligent tool in the toolbox, guys, but I was like, why did everybody cry? All I need to do is find one adult that will sponsor one child, and we could solve this orphanage problem big time around the world. And through no instruction of my own, and now at 70 years of age, our family are all involved with orphans. Most of it is through one of my sons, who he's the CEO of fastest growing orphan charity in the UK. He has over 110,000 orphans his team take care of daily, 3 meals a day. But each one of my family and some of my grandchildren, we all have orphans personally that we sponsor. And so that was a transforming moment.
Yeah, that's every time you tell that story, I just kind of blows my mind that your parents had too many kids and had to give one of you up, and the fact that you were able to have that, I don't know, perspective at 7 or 8 years old is just pretty incredible.
But it's no different to the moment I just told you about when I was 16. I need a life, need a wife, no problem. Yeah. One is waiting for me, and one is waiting for me in the newspaper. And she's been the most wonderful. In fact, I'll tell you a secret. I managed to get her a new job this week. She's got a brand new job. She's so excited about it. But so we're still having that kind of fun.
Yeah.
We're certainly not resting. So that was a transformation moment. And then the second one was when the richest soccer club in the world the richest soccer club in the world at the time. A friend of mine was doing some work there, and I went down when I went down with him for a fun day to the manager's dressing room. I used to be an electrician on nuclear submarines, and I thought I'll go down and do a little bit of electrical work. But when I was there, the project manager asked to see me, and he asked me if I would mentor him. And that was a changing moment, because most of the leaders I'd been working with up to that time is what I call priests or pastors or leaders. They were church leaders. But in that moment, it changed me forever. The Lord said, I'm calling you also to go into the marketplace and raise up the kings in the marketplace. A kings in the marketplace would just be any believer in any job in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm working with leaders in 17 different countries. Some of them, the poorest of the poor, and others are multimillionaires, businessmen. And so I'm now mentoring, pastoring, coaching, call it what you like, in a whole different sphere of influence. That was a changing moment.
Yeah.
So I was only working mostly with church leaders, but now I'm in 7 spheres of influence. I'm in government and in media, and I'm in finance, in family, in business. I think I'll send a link to you guys of the 7, with more details of the 7 spheres of influence of leaders I'm shaping and forming now. So these were a couple of life-changing moments, because we all have that moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you think, I'm goosed, I've got nothing left in the tank, nothing left to give, and then boom, one divine moment changes everything. So,
yeah, absolutely. And that I think that goes back a bit to what we were talking about with Gideon and just continuing to stay down the path, right? And keep the faith. And
just when you think you're finished, that's the moment when you step aside on the bus and let God drive the bus, and it takes you to a whole new level. And the only human being that can cause defeat in your life is the one you see in the morning, in the mirror each morning. That's the only human being in the universe that can cause defeat in your life.
Yeah.
And if
absolutely.
you never allow yourself the luxury of a single self-doubt or negative thought, never allow yourself the luxury of a single self-doubt or negative thought, then you're poised to be taken to the next level. And I as I'm turning 70, I'm more excited about the new levels that are heading my way. And so
that's really fun to hear. As a few years younger than you, to
at least
to hear that you're about to turn 70 and you still have that fire and that excitement for life. Because I think sometimes, again, your perception of what it might be like at that age is that life is over, and I suppose it would be if that's the outlook that you had. But
I'm telling you what, brother, people get panic when they turn 40, 50, 60. I cannot wait till 70, because then the fun begins. Because the thing is about it is, you don't worry about all the little things anymore. You don't lose sleep in all the little things anymore. You just know that, a third moment, I was going to mention a third game-changing moment, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
It's relevant to this, because last Christmas, Christmas 2020, a professor stormed into my hospital bedroom and said, Mr. Dowds, your lungs are finished. Your chest is finished. We have 1 hour to save your life. 1 hour. And you have to sign your life over to a dice on a computer at Oxford University. And they will roll the dice, and the dice will decide whether you get Donald Trump's drug, whether you get this drug, and we're going to blitz you for 7 days with high doses of experimental drugs. I said, do they work? And she said, we have no idea. That's why we call them experimental. And they rolled the dice, and the main drug I needed, the dice said no, because from that moment, your life is in the hands of a dice on a computer.
Yeah.
And not a human being. But the dice said no, and the consultant came in and he was all discouraged. At this point, I was on oxygen. I couldn't get one single deep breath or walk more than 5 steps. And he came in and he said, oh, I've got bad news, Mr. Dowds. The computer said no. You need this drug. I burst out laughing because faith people have 2 antennas, one to the man on earth and one to heaven. And if you allow the one to earth to call the shots, you're goose, you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
But if you keep the one to heaven switched on, so as he's talking to me, I'm listening to the one from heaven. And this is what the one from heaven said. And I fed him. I said, excuse me, sir, don't you be discouraged. Don't you be discouraged, because you have your faith in the dice. I have my faith in my dad who rolls the dice. And from the moment I came into my mother's womb, every time he rolls the dice, I get a 6 every time. So whatever the dice says, I'm coming out this hospital in 40 hours, like Superman. And I did. I came out that hospital, oh my God, brand new, 100%. Wow. A little bit weary, a little bit tired, getting energy back, but 0 COVID or post-COVID symptoms in 40 hours.
Yeah, amazing.
That was a change.
I love it. Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to encourage people out there who think, I've got 1 gallon left in the tank. I've got $1 left in the bank. I've got 1 hour. Hey, your Father is insanely in love with you, your Father God. And if you'll just put your trust in him 1 minute more, he'll flip the dice for you. 6.
Yeah. Love it. Appreciate you sharing that experience. Real quick, getting close to closing it up here, but I did want to talk just a little bit. You mentioned it every 10 years and you're coming up on 70 and planning for the next 30 years. I do often ask, because I think vision is a big part of championship leaders. Success, I guess you'd say, is having a big vision, usually a bit bigger vision than others are able to see themselves. So could you share a little bit about your vision and where you want to go over the next 30 years?
Oh my goodness, right. So there was a wee man in my town some years ago, and they would not let him into the big park because of family arguments. And he began to dream that he'd become the richest man in the whole world, and he would give the park libraries and swimming pools for free to kids who could not afford it. When any of you guys come to visit me, I'll take you to this man's house. The man's name is Andrew Carnegie. And Andrew Carnegie went to America, got involved with the steel industry, and he put railway lines all across America. He put railway lines all. I'm not saying he was perfect, and I'm not saying he didn't have a bit of flesh like we all do, but what I'm saying is that this one man, and his secret was to advance while everybody else was retreating.
Yeah.
So when people in Scotland most times turn 70, they retreat to the golf course.
Yeah.
Which I call televised sky, not Sky Television, televised sky. What I mean by that is when it's on television, you can't see the ball, you can only see sky.
That's right. Where is it?
And so my 7-year, my next vision for the next 10 years is to put a base in all 7 continents in the world and put principal tram lines, create tram lines, railway lines of principles and biblical success thoughts all through all 7 continents, for people, for leaders, and for businessmen, for influencers, for basically anybody that wants to advance to the next level.
Yeah. Wow.
And advance the kingdom wherever they are. And I've seen this being done by the poorest of the poor in the worst prisons in the 5th world, not just the 3rd world. So I want to put tram lines across all, and for anybody that wants to go to the next level, all they need to do is get their train on these railway lines, these principles, and boom, do what nobody else is doing, go where nobody else is going, and get results that nobody else is getting, purely and simply because they're aligning themselves with kingdom principles of advancing.
That's a big mission, right? And not one that you probably can do on your own either. So
yeah,
I love it. Yeah.
No, we're going to need your help to get us in shape, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. Count me in on that for sure.
Come on.
Well, I do appreciate your time and thank you for being here. This has been a special, like we said, the 300th episode. There'll be 300 more, and we'll keep it going, keep it moving. But as we do wrap this up, is there 1 or 2 things that, if the listeners were to implement today would help move their life forward today? What would you say those would be?
Yeah, what was the question again?
Yeah, if you had 1 or 2 guiding principles that if people were to implement into their life today would help move their life forward in a positive way, what would that be?
Okay, and I'll give you one big one major one, and it's not from the Braveheart movie.
No.
Well, there's a version of it there. There is a version of it, but it didn't come from that. It came to me from the man the pastor that invented bubble wrap. Invented bubble wrap in New Zealand, and he gave it to me 10 years before the Braveheart movie came in. But I think Mel Gibson pinched it anyway.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. Here it is. I'm just joking. Here it is. If you ever wake up in the morning, I'll give you 2 sides. That if you ever wake up in the morning and you're not in the middle of a fight, pick one. Start one. Don't wait until life beats you up, doubts beat you up, disappointments beat you up, discouragement. Identify the fight that was picked on you when you were asleep. That fear that came in during the night that didn't make any sense. That anxiety, that little worry. Pick a fight with them first thing in the morning. Bind each one, renounce them in Jesus' name, and get filled with the fun and the joy of God in worship and in the word of God in the morning, so that when you go out, and when you do that, you do what Jesus did. Jesus never left the house to pick a fight. He shook the apple trees. He shook the apple trees on his knees. And so he spent the rest of the day merely picking up the apples that had fallen off the trees. Yeah. You don't need to go through your day fighting no one. So that would be the first. I actually will give a second one very quickly. Yeah. And this is the whole world right now is focused on a little place in Russia and a little man called Vladimir Putin. Before pandemic broke out, I visited Putin's hometown of St. Petersburg, and I visited the little island where he stores his nuclear warships. Now, the world knows about Putin, St. Petersburg, but who knows about the greatest move of God ever I've heard of in Russia, that was on that exact same spot before Putin put his nuclear base there. And there was a man called St. John of Kronstadt, had 5,000 people show up at 5 o'clock every morning. And for 2 hours he taught, and miracles galore happen every single morning. So the next time you hear the news, the war, troubles on the media, forget the antenna that the media's given you. Switch on the St. John of Kronstadt and Tenna, because St. John of Kronstadt, the seeds he planted there, they will bear fruit. We're going to see the greatest revival ever in that place. But his favorite quote wakes me up every morning. And very quickly, this is it. If you ever wake up in the morning and find yourself in a dark place, look up and you will see the Trinity, the face of the Father, the face of the Son, and the face of the Holy Spirit shining on you brighter than the sun. Come on.
I love you. Awesome. Appreciate it.
Okay,
beautiful. What are a few ways that the listeners can see more about you and what you're up to?
Okay. At the moment, I'm keeping everything simple.
Yeah.
And I haven't written a book in 50 years because far too many books have been written on theories, unproven. And I decided I would test my principles for 50 solid years before I would write one thing. Because, and so anything I'm sharing is ironclad tested principles of 50 solid years.
Yeah.
And so the best way at the moment to follow me is on Facebook, Jimmy Dowds, that's Jimi, Jimmy Dowds. Log on there, connect with me, and then I'll connect them at some point with my locker room coaching event when it kicks off again.
Yeah.
So that's the best way to get it.
You're going to be writing a book here soon, right?
I've already written it. And,
you've written it.
It's in the hands of a New York Times bestseller.
I love it.
So,
is that Angie?
Joyce Meyer is the best-selling female writer in America, on the Christian scene, but Annie Downs
is who I was
right
thinking
behind her. So my book is with Annie at the moment, and she's giving it the thumbs up. And then at the right time, we'll get it out there.
Awesome. Love it. All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate you being here. And this has been an honor. Thank you.
God bless, guys. Thank you. Bye.